Forkast News is your gateway to all things blockchain. We do the deep dive and the due diligence on the blockchain projects and platforms that matter, because we aim to be the most reliable source of intellectual discourse and insight that inform, educate, and bridge the gap between the blockchain industry and the mainstream. Welcome to this special edition in Switzerland. I'm Forkast News Editor-in-Chief Angie Lau. To understand how blockchain is shaping banking innovation from a Swiss point of view, one must come to Zurich and speak to the Swiss Bankers Association. Now, the SBA is a self-regulated industry group where almost every bank in Switzerland is a member. The SBA coordinates new banking innovation, regulatory concerns, and guidance for all its members. And really, these are firms from some of the biggest names you know, from Credit Suisse to UBS and everyone in between. And it coordinates and guides this communication with federal policymakers. Now, this direct dialogue is helping shape some of the most innovative blockchain thinking in banking today. With me right now is Swiss Bankers Association Deputy CEO August Benz, here really to help us think about Switzerland in the broader context of this global blockchain industry. So welcome, August.
Welcome.
We're sitting across the river. This is the river of Limmat. And really we're in the heart of Zurich right now, where a lot of this banking innovation as it pertains to blockchain is really thriving, but not a lot of people know about it. Tell us what's happening here.
Well, customers are looking for high quality, easy to use digital services also these days, and it's kind of our job now as an association to support kind of regulatory framework that actually is really enabling these easy to use digital services. And we believe that the technology like distributed ledger technology is one of these potentially very high level digital services and technologies that really may make the difference. And we have here a pretty thriving community, also of course in a few other locations here in Switzerland, in particular of course Zug, that everybody knows about with the Crypto Valley. And we see as an association as a door opener. You know, how can we enable this new technology to really thriving, not just, of course, in this kind of new developing world, but also, of course, in the traditional financial services world.
So increasingly, regulatory compliance is being baked into a lot of the business thinking of these new blockchain startups. That really changed from even last year and the years before. Can you tell me why?
Well, there's been a very big effort here in Switzerland because we see this technology as something with a lot of potential. And actually a lot of the stakeholders here trying to support this new technology as well. You know, how can we put this into practice? And that of course goes from the government, who strongly supports these initiatives, but also of course in the startup scene, of course, which is very active here. But then of course also our members who are close and see quite a lot of potential also in this technology, and then us as association who's trying to bring together these kind of stakeholders as well. And so that's what been happening over the last year and two, and we think we've made quite a bit of progress, and our goal, at least as an association, is really to try to bring together these two worlds. The traditional financial services world, who knows a lot about how banking is being done, and knows in particular, of course, the regulatory framework. And then on the other hand, you have this new world with this new technology, where you have a lot of tech specialists who, of course, know a bit less about regulatory requirements. Mm-hmm. And our job is very much trying to bring these two worlds together.
What are these relationships like? It seems like a very direct communications that you have with policymakers, and they're also seeking guidance out from the group, from not only the banking industry, but also from blockchain startups and players as well.
Yeah, I can give you a specific example. For example, one of the things that became very obvious was that that's actually very difficult for DLT firms, for blockchain firms who are working in that space, actually get a corporate account, really just to pay salaries and just do the normal things that you would otherwise do. And there's been a lot of pressure, on the community overall, because if you want us to thrive for this industry here in this country, then of course we somehow have to resolve this topic, because of course the concerns are very clearly, that we have to obey, of course, these anti-money laundering rules. We have to know where the money is from. KYC, of course, know your customer, and that of course is something that is very important if you want to be a respected and of course serious player in the financial services world. And that was the background of when we started looking into this, what could we do to support, of course, this industry and actually enabling this technology happening in this market. And what we've done, and we've published already last year a guideline on how to open such corporate accounts for blockchain firms and what you have to consider. So which AML elements that are very important, and how you actually should follow this. This is something that we've published, as I said, last year already. We've actually just released last month the second version, an updated version, because of course things do develop, and we've made this tried to make it even more clear and clarify one or the other point. And it really has now, in our view, really started really getting the whole thing moving in terms of really, that it's much easier than it used to be to open such an account. And so if you follow these rules, I think there's a pretty good chance these days in Switzerland that as a blockchain firm you can operate within the traditional financial services world as well.
And so when people come here and when startup projects start to grow their blockchain idea or their DLT idea here in Switzerland, how do they engage differently to a global competitive landscape? How are the companies that begin here behave differently, or what is a unique characteristic of companies that get started here against this regulatory backdrop and guidance?
Yeah, I mean, our regulatory approach and now as a nation, of course, is same business, same rules. So actually, everybody is aware, if you do payments, you have to follow, of course, the payment rules. Independent whether you're now working with a new technology or the old technology, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. So that's very clear that everybody has to basically obey to the same rules, and that, in our view, is very important. How you can bring together the kind of more traditional world and of course the world that is now emerging with this new technology. And so if somebody, it all pretty much started in kind of 2014, so about 5 years ago, with Ethereum starting here in Zug. And I'm sure you've heard that from a few other colleagues. This is really around this, of course, now kind of an ecosystem developed over the last couple of years, where various stakeholders, of course, were trying to support this. And this has really now emerged with roughly, more than what I understand, more than 800 now blockchain-related firms in different shapes and forms, and trying to leverage, the opportunities that you have here. But I think it's really this interaction between, the authorities, the startups, the financial services world, also on the traditional side, the banks and the insurance companies. Also, insurance companies are very active in this field. They have their own small kind of venture as well, who's trying to exploit and trying to find out ways that really helps to make processes more efficient. And of course, various things are happening on the banking side as well.
And what's motivating Switzerland?
Switzerland is a very, very innovative country. It's always been ranked number one in terms of innovation for many, many years. And so it's something that people really like here. And we see that, blockchain and DLT really is something that really could, change the way that financial services are being provided, could change quite significantly. And we would like to be at the forefront of this potential change. And that's, in our view, is actually very nicely connected with kind of characteristics and nature and character of a lot of the Swiss people.
It is incredible innovation that obviously would have huge impact in fintech. Are the big banks embracing it as quickly as perhaps smaller, more flexible, fast-moving, firms when it comes to blockchain? Because it's not obvious right now.
I mean, probably the best is to find out if you talk to them directly, the big ones. What I can tell you is that, of course, I see quite a lot of projects that they're working on. Trade finance is a very obvious one where you could make processes significantly more efficient, and a lot of banks, not just Swiss banks, are involved in these ventures. So there's a lot of activity actually happening. But best is really talking to them. What happens here, of course, in Switzerland in terms of relationships between the banks and the fintechs is we see this as a pretty symbiotic relationship. At the beginning, the discussion was, are these real, will they cannibalize, the traditional world and the likes? But, we more and more see it as actually pretty symbiotic. So what is happening on the fintech side is often very innovative. They can be much faster, can try things more quickly. They're allowed to fail as well, of course. And of course, if something really works out, they can really link up with banks. And that's what we start seeing now is that a lot of the Swiss traditional banks, of course, collaborate more and more now with the fintechs. And we think that is actually, a very good way forward for both parties.
Is this a model that you've adopted as you compare what other innovations are happening across Europe and around the world in other countries?
Well, Switzerland is probably a bit a special case. Here things are very bottom-up driven. So this is not something that somebody says, and this is now the plan, and we do this. So things are really bottom-up driven. And also in this situation, this is not something anybody planned. It happened, but for us, what is important, if we see this as an opportunity, then we believe it's critical that you actually really try to then, bring it to the forefront and make it possible if it really turns out to be as a true reality or true opportunity.
What makes it really unique is that there is just this triangulation of industry group, of traditional legacy banks, and then of completely, innovative and startup industry called blockchain and DLT. And there really is this very symbiotic environment that seems to exist here. Where do you think that philosophy came from? Is it the Swiss way of doing things? How did this kind of come about?
Yes, I would seriously probably think that this is a bit in the DNA, because of course Switzerland is not a large country.
Of course.
So people do know each other, and that of course provides these kind of opportunities that you actually can collaborate very well. And that's maybe quickly also to refer to kind of the recent event that we organized, how you do this. And because we organized 2 weeks ago this very first, for us at least, event called Banking Meets DLT. That's been a kind of collaboration between the Swiss Blockchain Federation, the University of Basel Center for Innovative Finance, and the Swiss Bankers Association. So we kind of grouped together. And the idea here was very much to bring, basically to confront banking employees, so really, who work in all kinds of different fields, and to bring them together with DLT specialists. And we programmed and designed a whole event around this, and it was a full-day program. It was actually highly oversubscribed and filled actually within a day. And so we brought in really then, the regulator was presenting and was on panels. The two digital banks that just got a license, for example, presented their business case. Storage solutions were presented, and various use cases, trade finance, but also other use cases were presented. Trying really to bring together the various stakeholders, and that's really happening not just in our kind of world now that we're just talking about. So that's really something that you see here on very many locations.
What are the top projects that came out of that Banking Meets DLT event?
Well, that's hopefully really something that goes back into the banks. And for us as an association, we would like to repeat this, of course. The plan is now to do something on in the French-speaking part of Switzerland as well.
Well, give us a sense of some of the projects, like some of the services that we might be able to see as a result of DLT in banking.
In terms of now, really, well, that's for an association, that's not our focus, of course. This is something that, is really business decisions and the like. So that's not really something that we can promote. That's, for example, one of the things that was also presented was, how exactly do traditional banks do these KYC AML processes, when they onboard such a blockchain-related firm. And so they were explaining, all the questions that they try to answer, what databases that they use, and whatever is all included. And also there's a few open questions still that they're trying to address further now. And that's something, of course, that I would expect that this is going to kind of trigger into any other banks who's interested in looking into this as well. So they got a few examples of how it could be done, and so I would expect even more of these, corporate accounts being opened.
One of the big themes of 2019 is regulatory framework that really could potentially guide growth. That is a lot of the desire that we're hearing from the industry, increasingly so. Having said that, how do you compare and contrast yourself from a regulatory framework against international regulations? Do you think that there needs to be a lot more collaboration from an international point of view, or do you think that you want to create a lot of those banking innovations and regulatory innovations from a Swiss point of view?
Yeah, I mean, as an association, we don't regulate as such, but of course we're very keen on understanding and trying to shape a bit, of course, what is happening on the regulatory side. If I look at this from a more international level, then our credo has always been to have a level playing field. Same as I said before, same business, same rules, but also from an international perspective, we would expect, particularly as a small country, that it's very important to have a level playing field. Now, in this specific topic now of DLT blockchain, we believe actually that Switzerland is actually pretty much at the forefront in terms of how this could be regulated and should be regulated. We've gone right through a consultation process now of how this should be regulated in Switzerland. So we don't go for a dedicated blockchain law. So what we believe is actually we have to adopt very specifically certain elements in our existing law to make this compliant, because we believe in a principle-based, technology-neutral legislation and regulation. And so that's where we're in the midst of it. Now, if I compare this to an international level, we all start a bit, of course, we have a very different starting point. We have here a very different kind of law and setup compared to other jurisdictions. But we believe, of course, that, at the end of the day, we should all aspire at least to a level playing field. And a good example here is the FATF rules, so the Financial Action Task Force. They actually, of course, look at this topic very specifically, just come out with a few guidances in terms of blockchain firms. And actually, that is something that, that needs to apply to everybody, and certainly applies to Switzerland. In fact, FINMA last week just published, when they provided 2 licenses to these 2 digital banks, they also actually published also some additional guidance in terms of money laundering, anti-money laundering rules, and actually goes somewhat beyond even what the FATF is actually requiring. So I think critical is, have a level playing field, but of course, you can go further, and in particular from a Swiss perspective, it's very important that we are absolutely compliant on the anti-money laundering topic.
KYC, AML, very critical issues, but also, how are tokens and future coins and the way that projects raise capital for their ideas. What about the thinking around there, and how is the association trying to help with that guidance?
Yeah. So maybe we have very regular interactions, of course, with the authorities. And to give you 2 examples here, one of them you just mentioned. For example, how do we tax digital assets? So be it cryptocurrencies or anything else, any other token. So that's a very critical question in terms of implications in terms of how you do business with this, depending on what kind of tax there is, and at the moment, our tax authorities actually come out also last week, interestingly enough, with a first guidance of how it could be treated, and of course, from our perspective, there's still a few more questions that are open, and we are now trying to clarify this further together with them. And so by continuing...
What are the questions, what are the concerns from your organization?
In terms of the taxation topic now, so the question really is in terms of, what kind of asset is it really? Because that brings me actually to the second topic, which is also not clear. How should this be treated on the balance sheet side? You know, where do we book this? A token. And depending on where you book it, it can be taxed differently. And so that's the first question in our view that we have to clarify. You know, how should it be treated on a balance sheet? And once we've got this answered, then of course we then are much clearer about, you know, how it should be taxed as well. And so for us, that's a bit the question here now is, you know, we don't quite, you know, we may have a slightly different view in terms of how best this could be treated on the balance sheet side. And that's of course, you know, when we have the discussion again with the tax authorities. So these are the two big questions that we have at the moment. How is this treated on the balance sheet? And then this has implications in terms of taxation.
We often hear of U.S. Guidelines as being the gold standard because it's one of the strictest in the world. How do you compare and contrast Switzerland with that standard, number one? And number two, do you think that there's an alternative? Is there potentially a global gold standard that can be innovated outside of the U.S.?
In terms of now, golden standard in terms of
regulatory,
in terms of overall regulation,
yes.
You know, we have actually a lot of visitors from the US as it happens, because we really believe that we are pretty much at the forefront here. So we have a lot of discussions with them. You know, they visit sometimes us, but they of course visit a lot of the authorities as well. So, you know, I can't tell you exactly, you know, how this will evolve. They have a slightly different approach at the moment. And of course, you know, should they have a slightly different standard again, this is something that of course we have to look into again, you know, once it's really public. But so far, we believe that we have a pretty good approach, and then of course have to see, you know, if they come out with a regulation, what this means, of course, for our own regulation.
The Swiss Banking Association, Swiss Bankers Association has been at the forefront for a lot of innovation for its members. Where do you think it's going into 2020 and beyond as this entire industry evolves?
I mean, that's a very difficult question that you're asking. I mean, I can tell you that as an association, of course, we see us very much as a door opener. Oh. So to give you a few examples, for example, for us, it's absolutely critical that banks start working with the cloud services. And if you have big banking secrecy like we have it here still in Switzerland, and of course that's quite a difficult discussion. And so we've just published last year as well a cloud guideline to enable them, because, you know, if you want to do big data, machine learning as a bank, which lots of them are looking into, then, you know, just for capacity reasons, a bank has to start working with a cloud. Otherwise, just technologically and capacity-wise, it's going to be a challenge. So that's something that we're trying to enable with this cloud guideline. And also this is pretty much at the forefront, and there's a lot of international interest as well of how we do this. Another topic is, of course, you know, the whole open banking ecosystem topic. You know, that's because banks very clearly, in our view, have a lot of opportunities in terms of developing ecosystems. And here the question is, how do we do this? Europe has done this with a regulation called PSD2. We don't see kind of, you know, an obligation to do this, but, you know, we see this. We see there's a lot of opportunities, and so the question is about working on details about, you know, standardized interfaces. You know, how do settlements work when you disagree about certain topics and the likes. There's a few questions that we have to answer. Really enabling opening doors where there's certain uncertainties. Being now on blockchain with our blockchain guidelines, but also various topics we just discussed. You know, how this is treated tax-wise. You know, how does it work on a balance sheet and the likes. So trying to clarify wherever there are uncertainties to enable innovation. But from our perspective, innovation, of course, doesn't happen with us as an association. Our job is to kind of create a regulatory environment that actually allows the firms and our members in particular, of course, to be innovative.
Yeah. How excited is the banking industry here in Switzerland to all these innovations?
Well, for the Swiss banking financial center as such, you know, innovation is critical. You know, we believe that we are in a very good position. We have lots of assets here. We have, in our view, a very unique starting point and position. You know, we have a very stable economy, and of course a lot of foreigners bring also their assets here, because it is a very stable economy and it's safe to have the money here. Everything is it's actually compliant.
But it is
here.
still critical to Switzerland's overall economic growth.
It is, of course, critical. However, of course, now with all these new technological opportunities, of course, we now have the opportunity to hopefully move forward also in terms of the way that we provide services to make this much more efficient, better for the client, and that's what we're trying to support and foster, that, of course, the clients that bring the money here, that we can serve them in the best possible way. And that means, of course, that we have to change and the way that we do things, that we have to change in pretty much every respect. And that is a process that is ongoing, that will keep us busy for many, many years. And for somebody, for us who likes change, that's a very exciting prospect.
Well, not everybody likes change, so I really always admire people who do. Last question for you. What do you think the biggest external obstacle is, and how do you hope to overcome it?
For me, it's really critical now, if we discuss here now the blockchain-related topics, really to bring together these two worlds. Because I think, if you bring together the traditional banking world with this newly developing world that does financial service, but in a different way, we believe that bringing them together really trigger more innovation. And that's what we're trying to foster here, to actually enable these innovations in Switzerland. Because, of course, we would love it if a lot of these activities and innovations come out of here and actually are being implemented here.
I certainly don't doubt it in the years to come. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
All right. If you like that, come back for more. All you have to do is click like, always comment, we love that, and subscribe. And don't forget to watch the next one.